quick little intro and just talk for just a minute or so. Then we're going to do a group exercise for just a few minutes. And then we're going to give 3 topics on speaking like a leader. And then we have some tips at the end. So that's kind of where we're going with things. And then whatever time we fill up, we'll add different content in here and we'll make it work all the way through. So first of all, I'm going to take a page out of Brandon's book. If anybody's seen Brandon Hendrickson do a little presentation, he does this thumbs up and kind of my first question is going to be, I really like to speak in front of people, or I really hate to speak in front of people. So Brandon will just ask for a quick response. And so on 1, 2, 3, I really like, I really don't. All right, good. We got a couple thumbs downs and we got a couple thumbs up. I love it. The second question is, I have to speak to people frequently. I have to speak in front of people frequently or not. All right, so even the people that were kind of thumbs down have to talk in front of people a lot. One thing about speaking is those people really want you to succeed. They really want you to do well. So it's not generally a hostile audience there. It's talking to friends, and if you can keep that in mind, they really want things to go well. For one thing, they want to enjoy your speaking. So the better that you can do to help them out, that would be good. Why do leaders speak? This is that part where you talk back at me. Why do leaders need to speak?
Communicate ideas.
Communicate ideas. Okay. And?
Lead the way.
Lead the way. And how do they do that?
Paint a picture for where the company where we're going, and what the goal is and how to get there.
Very good. Cool.
To build consensus or alignment around a specific goal.
Okay. Build consensus. Persuade.
I find like build excitement around a vision, like a shared vision.
Cool.
Educate and inform.
Educate and inform. Sometimes the information is all going one way. Anything else? Get feedback. Definitely. Just networking, talking to people, just in general, just in the course of business, customers, etc. Lots of reasons that we talk. And where and why and how? Where and how do leaders have to speak? What reasons? In what areas? Well, I think when you talk about formal speaking, a lot of times it's a formal speech. It's a speech in front of people, like an address or a real speech. But in what other cases do you have to speak?
I think every day when you're communicating, you're representing your organization to anybody, whether it's just a single person or in a more formal setting. So you're communicating a vision of your organization and a impression.
Cool. Otherwise?
Sales environment.
Sales environment, a lot of times doing pitches, even owners and founders that have to pitch their ideas. And again, just plain old sales messages. Your role.
Helping people with issues. It just seems like half of what I do anymore.
Yeah. And we tend to forget sometimes that simple conversations are public speaking. It's just to a small group. But and a conversation is really just a little meeting. So if you're helping somebody with individual issues or groups with individual issues, then it's still a meeting, it's still public speaking. And all these things that we're going to talk about today, I think can apply just as well in a formal speech as in a conversation. And keep all of these things in mind as we go through this. Now, where do you do most of your speaking? It sounds like you have more of the conversations with employees and stuff, Joel. But where do other people do their public speaking? Molly, I know. I'll just call on Molly here. Where do you do your public speaking?
Well, I used to be a school teacher, so that's definitely a leader in front of education. But people call me to speak in front of Boy Scout troops and different groups, and but every single week I'm filmed So I'm a school teacher by trade, so not a public speaker in front of adults. And every week there's a camera that is on the city council as we sit up there with the mayor on the dais. And so it's a bunch of informing, it's a bunch of bringing ideas, and of course voting for policy. So it's intimidating when possibly 100,000+ people, and so it's terrifying, but you have to, so to get accomplished a goal. So
Yep. Cool. Anybody else? Where do you do your public speaking?
Most
Speak-
mine's right in front of a Zoom camera.
Yes.
Distance from so many people.
Yes.
I don't think I'm doing it enough at all, because I'm like him, like, I've lost out on all informal speak, and like, the most informal speak I got was last night, because I came to a Collider event, but it's all, I have a problem, text the person, get on a Slack call, fix the problem, done, don't even say how, so I'm like 9, and then I haven't got even, I've been working on the product so much, I don't even get out to talk to normal people anymore, which is bad. So it should be both formal and informal.
Yeah.
And scheduled and unscheduled, but it's not.
Practice it all, yes. And it's, when I was working only at home, I just desired to get out and talk to people. And fortunately, the Cube and the Collider were here as co-working environments, so I could get out and see people, work next to people, hear people's ideas, talk to people, and ask them questions, even though they weren't really co-workers when it came to that, or my own co-workers when it comes to that co-working. But it was so important just to get that people contact and keep the communication skills there. I once did a solo Boundary Waters trip. And it was only for 4 days. But by the end of those 4 days of not talking to people, I could hardly string a sentence together. The guy came from the outfitter to pick me up at the end of the trip, and I couldn't even talk. I was babbling like an idiot out there. It was my son that picked me up, actually, but I couldn't even talk to him. I'd already forgotten how to speak, and I thought right away, I got to go on a 2-week solo sometime, just so I can really find what it's like to not know how to talk anymore. But working at home can really be a challenge, and the Zoom thing has been a new thing in the last couple of years, of course, several years, I should say now, where speaking on camera a lot. How many people were on video calls before the pandemic? Couple. How many people just had conference calls?
Yeah.
More of that before, because I worked remotely from 2009 all the way through, and up until the pandemic, I think I had been on 1 video conference call. Even though we used the equivalent of Zoom, nobody put their camera on. And then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden people wanted to see faces. So we all were on Zoom just like that. And that was a new challenge to speak on camera and speak, I guess, effectively and run a meeting effectively. And a couple other things that we'll talk about later on too, is doing hybrid meeting sort of things if we get time with that. All right, I'm gonna do a quick little exercise. The exercise like this is always a little risk, but I'm gonna split you into 2 groups. And I'll tell you, I'm gonna have this half of the room, just because we're gonna do this very informal. I think Corey, you're probably the deciding line here. But this half, go over here, I'll come over and talk to you and give you your assignment. This group, go over here, I'll talk to you and give you your assignment. We're just gonna put some words up on the wall. And then we're gonna give 2 minutes on this. So we're gonna write fast. So whoever volunteers to write with the marker has to be able to write fast. I didn't check to see if these markers go through onto the wall.
They will.
They will. Let's not do that. Let's not do that. Take the sheet off the wall and go back there and find a table, and I'll clean off this table and somebody can write up here. How's that sound? So that means I would just as soon not ruin the premises while we're doing this.
The bar back here.
He was never invited back.
Yeah, let's not do
Hey, Mark.
that.
Good to see you. I keep getting.
It's okay to hurry.
All right.
Feel free to hasten. All right. So what I would like to do is as many words as you can get that have to do with a good speaker. The characteristics and traits of a good speaker. They all, and I suppose we should be careful when we go through here too, they all have to start with the letter C. 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 As many words as you can get, traits of a good speaker, starting with C.
Didn't say we spell it right. Confident.
Colorful. Comfortable.
Comedic, just thinking like bringing humor and lightness to this.
Courageous.
They got like 20 seconds.
I wanna say candid, but you have to.
I don't know the spell.
Collaborative.
I can't remember.
Oh, we have.
Control.
Communicator.
Competent. Yep.
I'll say colorful.
got that.
Connected.
I wanna put champion, because it's like you're, like, the leader, or champion of your, what you're talking about, or for the common goal, or something like that. Creative.
I always comment on something of your presentation and your demeanor.
Compassionate is good.
I gave you a hint. What was it?
When you walk up to the podium, you are always very.
Can't think of the C word.
That's okay.
I can't hear you.
Calm.
Yeah, let's go with
Go with that.
Yeah, I guess cool.
Let's go cool. Yeah, alright.
That was an S.
If you're cheerful, you have to be cheerful, right?
Oh, that's a good one.
Maybe that was it, you're cheerful.
Yeah.
A little bit less than a minute left.
I'm just trying to like shoehorn C words into it. Like. Yeah. Ooh. Ooh, okay. Control it. Yeah.
You have to be censored, right?
Ooh.
How many more seconds?
I was thinking
40.
careful.
Put it back.
Yeah.
Okay, we're starting to run dry over here, so, in
Alright.
both cases,
We're
good deal.
good. Okay.
Now let's put it back up.
What word do you want?
I know.
What was the word you wanted?
That's what I
Oh,
almost
calm.
always.
Okay.
I know.
Are you
That's
calm
always-
already?
He is. Well, at least when he's speaking, he is. I've never seen him when he's trying to get his kids to school on time.
Ooh, I like your triplets.
Thank you, you can buy one, it's $35.
We're good. We're good.
Very nice. Very neat.
Again, I was gonna check this off, but
Ah.
you know what? Any whiteboard markers that won't go through? Marty, can you give me a 9:15 kind of thing when we get there?
Yeah.
Thank you. Keep track of that. So we have leadership words over here and speaker words over here. Like I say, sort of a risk. Scribes, I need you to go back up there. Who was writing? Joel, were you writing? No. Laura, there we go. There we go. Let's find the words that are in both places. So we got
Creative.
concise, let's start
Yeah.
Marty. Marty, you go, and Laura, can you keep up with Marty as you?
Yep.
Concise,
Okay.
clear,
Okay,
confident,
okay.
colorful,
What was that one?
colorful,
We don't have that one.
comfortable,
No.
comedic,
No.
courageous, candid,
No.
collaborative,
No.
controlled, competent,
Yeah.
connected,
Up at the top.
Thank you.
connected, champion, creative,
Yeah.
calm, collected, cool, cheerful, charming, capable, censored, careful.
Sounds good. Are there any that you don't have circled that he didn't mention?
Yes, we have communicator, charismatic, compassionate, consistent, a co-worker, coordinator, caring, composed, catalyst, competitive, and compelling.
Okay, quite a few that aren't on over there.
Carry on there, I think, right?
I would have composed too, apparently not.
All right, thank you very much for the
Yay.
cooperation on everybody. Good deal. All right. Like I say, a little exercise, a little bit of a risk there, but I think we already see the number of words that can be used in both places. And the idea of this is when you are a good speaker, when a person is a good speaker, they're presumed to be a leader. Speaking is perceived to be a leadership trait, and being able to speak well is a characteristic of a leader. You can see, even as you were listing off words, were there words that Marty was saying that you said, we should have put that one on our list?
Yes.
Because they're characteristics of a good speaker, but they're also characteristics of a good leader. Without elaborating on that, I think you can see that almost all these words can go back and forth. And that's just the ones that start with C.
I have a question, is there like a natural, like when you see a group and nobody's talking, the first person talked, now they're the leader? Are they a leader because they did it, or because they had the guts to do it, or they're used to doing it, or all those things?
Yes, yes, yes. I think what that's 2 hours worth of conversation right there, Dave. Because that's somewhat personality related and somewhat leadership related, and then there's a whole idea in the personality which has an aspect of control.
Yeah,
How much control do I need to have? And then there's the introvert extrovert thing, and there's the ultimate introverts or extroverts that just need to speak. The people that just need to have their mouth open and talking.
Mhm.
Or there's the people that see something needs to be done here, so I
Yeah.
need to speak and I have to step into that role, whether they're unwilling about that at all. It's always interesting.
Some people demand action, like, or want things to.
Yep. Quick anecdote, I once went to a place, a full week-long program called at the Center for Creative Leadership. And they did leaderless exercises with us. So they would take groups and put you in a room, give you a problem to solve, and they would time it and they would film it, which we would then watch later on. And they took 3 groups. They just picked, one day they just put us all in 3 groups and put us out into rooms, and they gave us the problem to solve, and then they predicted the order that we would solve the problem. What we didn't know was they had put us in groups of our need for control. So the high control people all went in one room, the low control people all went in one room, and the people that really didn't care, moderates, were in another room. And they always predicted that the moderates would come out first, solve the problem and come out, then the low control people, and then the high control people. Because the high control people fought for a long time over who was gonna be the leader. And they never really got to the problem. And the low control people kind of just said, somebody's gotta do this. And then the moderates would just sit down and say, who wants to do it this time? Who wants to lead the discussion? And they would solve the problem and come out. But it's kind of, again, a long story of, I think it's probably, that person is willing to accept the leadership role and step into that and see that it needs to be done when nobody's speaking like that. But there is going to be the people that right away, I'm here, I'm in charge. So I think that's less maybe whether they're comfortable to speak or whether they're comfortable to be the leader, but in some cases it's both are. As we go there. But it is that ability to communicate, And those that have their own business know that the importance of communicating the vision and talking to the employees, whether it's solving issues on an individual level or whether it's communicating that idea and that vision to people. People respect those good speaking skills, sometimes because they fear speaking themselves. So they can perceive that that person is somebody with the courage to get up in front of the group, again, perceived as a leadership trait. And one thing is when you, like say, putting your idea out there first, like you said, Dave, I'm the first one to speak, sometimes the people that speak have presumed credibility at first. And you just, it depends on whether you maintain that credibility while you're talking. So, but when you start, a lot of times you have that credibility right up front. And then the one thing that we're going to talk about today is people appreciate the considerate use of their time. And keeping that message short and to the point so that you give them adequate time but not too much. And going with that theme of the 3 topics for speaking like a leader, my first topic that I want to talk about and I want to discuss is saying more with less. Saying less words, but communicating more. And I have an actual handout here. I've been old school on this, if you don't mind. And on one side you have 2 little poems, and then there's some other literature on the back as we go. And the poems are, of course, by my favorite philosopher, Dr. Seuss. Actually, he only wrote one of them. If you take a quick look at that, I think it'd only take a minute. On the other side, there'll be the poems. That's kind of the whole message of this topic right here. Picked up the first one with a bunch of other Dr. Seuss books a long time ago. But I thought that was so appropriate. When you write, what are we taught in college to? Write concisely. Edit it down. Of course, in college we tend to be assigned a 15-page paper and we expand it to fit 15 pages if we can. But ideally, you take that 15-page paper, and if you're writing something for business now, you want that shortened to about 1 paragraph. How do you summarize that down into 1 paragraph? We do the same thing when we're speaking. There's on the reverse side of the poems, there's a quote there by Woodrow Wilson talking about, if I have to speak for 10 minutes, it takes me a week to write the speech. If I have to speak for 15 minutes, what is it, 3 days? But if you ask me to speak for an hour, I'm ready to go right now. Mark Twain also said one time, I'm sorry I wrote such a long letter, I didn't have time to write a short one. And we talk about that at our Toastmasters meetings and our Fourth and Toast meetings too, about if we have time, we can write a short speech. But if we write it at the last minute, it's going to be a long speech. Edit out everything that we can, that we don't need to say in there. And for those of you from a certain age, and I'm dating myself on this, but from the 80s, there were always the commercials on TV that were E.F. Hutton saying, when the brokerage, when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. And how many people have somebody in mind, maybe you're the person, that will sit through a meeting and not say anything, but when they finally speak up, everybody goes, know somebody like that? My brother-in-law was like that. You couldn't get 2 words out of him, but when he said anything, you better listen, because it was either going to be really profound or really funny, one or the other. Let's talk for a minute about prepared speeches. Who gives prepared, this is just questions for you, not in general, but for you yourselves. Who here gives prepared speeches on a regular basis? Joel? Okay, Marty? Okay, and Justin, all right. And what type of prepared speech?
We have a company meeting that we do, company-wide meeting, we do every Monday.
Okay. So you have time to think about what you're going to say and how to say it and what needs to be said. Okay. And how long is that typically?
Typically 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay, cool. So in a prepared speech, generally the advice I would give somebody is think about the 3 things you're gonna talk about during the speech. And I like to write my speeches out, whether or not I actually deliver that speech. I like to write the words that I would like to say, and I want to say. And that gives me 2 things. It first of all puts my thoughts in a coherent order, and it makes me summarize them into 3 big points. And it also lets me time my speech. So I know, and I know that if I write just normal size 11 font or so, it's gotta be a page and a third. And that's gonna be about a 6 to 7 minute speech for me at the pace that I read. So I can actually, without even timing it, I know how long it will be when I actually speak it. But that just lets me kind of prep. Now, I may not deliver all those words and those precise words, but at least puts all my thoughts on paper when I do that. And then I go back and I look at those points and I say, what's a good introduction and what's a good closing? I want to write those 3 points. I want to close with a powerful message that I want to leave people with. But then I also want to make that closing match how did I open the speech. So I might open it with a story. In my closing, I might refer back to that story. Connects everything through, and then I read through and make sure everything connects all the way through. So we're looking at content, we're looking at flow, and we're looking at cohesion, I guess, so that it makes sure everything ties together. And then I look back at the speech and say, is there anything in there that doesn't match the flow? Is there anything in there that doesn't quite match the topic or isn't so important that I need to really say that, and throw that out? Just to make sure it's as tight as we can make this as we go. Again, I may not end up delivering that speech. But we just talked last week at Fourth and Toast about sometimes it's really hard to throw out the thing that you really want to say, but you really shouldn't say it. It doesn't either belong in the speech, or maybe it's just not the right place to say it. But because we are so proud of that, whatever we have written or whatever we want to say, that we feel like we have to. Just sometimes it's the important thing to throw out. Once that's there, go ahead, Joe.
I just have a random question. A lot of times before I talk, I have a kind of a question internally about what the hell am I even doing? Because I got 100 guys. I got marriage problems, finance problems, mental health problems, hearing problems, various levels of knowledge, of intelligence, and it's like, whatever. If I have a message that I need to send on, hey, we need our quality better, and if I send that message strong enough that I feel like I need to get through, well, some guys some guys are gonna hear it, some guys it's gonna get through, and some guys I just shut down production for the day because they're so scared about making a mistake now. So when I've got a wide audience, and it's like I just question what am I even doing, because I know the message isn't it's gonna be a different message to everybody. I guess so.
You've got a really big audience, a really diverse audience when it comes to that. And one of the things that we would talk about is know your audience and tailor your speech to that audience. So you really sort of like teaching to a certain point in the class. If you're a school teacher, how do you reach all the kids at the same time? Mm-hmm. Any advice for Joel on this in terms of that specific situation? Because the first thing that comes to my mind is the general message up front with follow-up sub-speeches or sub-messages. To have different groups or on a smaller department level basis or something, or individual conversations, mm-hmm. Or maybe charge your managers or supervisors or foremen to deliver certain things in a different way, mm-hmm. to the people that need that. Any other advice for Joel on this particular situation?
We were doing scientific presentations, and one of the things is anyone that always assumed more knowledge than people had, base knowledge, always got in trouble. So it's like you build it from. No one ever goes to a seminar and said it was too easy to understand, so everyone tried, or the good presentations always just really basic, pretend like you don't know anything, pretend, and then you can build up from there, and then if people have complex questions, they can do it after the time, but never the other way around.
So kind of like writing to an 8th grade level?
It sounds good to me,
kind of
it's the morning.
Jocelyn and Laura?
I think
one of the most helpful things that I've learned from my husband, who's kind of coached me quite a bit, is that everything is story. Whether you're counseling somebody, you're doing a very high level presentation, you're talking to people, it is a story. And when you tell a story, doesn't matter where people are coming from, they'll be able to relate to that story because those are going to be relevant to them.
Laura?
In my experience, I only have to meet once a month, so it's not quite as frequent as usual, but I also invite the listeners to prepare with, a specific prompt or something so that maybe they're in a similar mindset and ready for whatever you're gonna bring, and they might even bring like their own funds of knowledge to that and say like, oh, this is what I thought of in the last few days since you sent that prompt. That has sort of shifted the audience in my experiences.
Okay, cool. Right.
And I think one general term is, that I would offer is our goal as a leader there and as a speaker is to provide clarity so that we have a very clear message, nobody can misunderstand it, and even if we simplify that to excess, just so that it's very clear, maybe it's a shorter speech with one simple clear message, but maybe there's also that further follow-up with, and you probably can identify the people within subgroups that need some follow-up and invite experts in those particular areas to deliver that message. Maybe you have people that can talk about the specific technical problem or the specific defect problem or something along those lines.
We do those things.
Yeah.
I appreciate everybody, that's helpful.
Cool, very good. And again, we're in the topic of saying more with less. We're gonna continue on that a little bit, but my message there would be, know what you're gonna say it, and then stop. Think before you speak, think about, and the next topic is gonna be think before you speak. So we'll go kind of right on into this, but think about what you need to say in whatever environment, if it's prepping your speech and writing your long formal speech, or whether it's, I have to stand up in a meeting and talk to somebody, or it's my turn to give an update on Zoom. Think about what you need to say, put it into very short bullet points, 3 of them, and then when it's your turn, stick to those 3 bullet points. Why do we do 3?
It's a magic number.
It's a magic number, it really is. It's a magic number. Why else do we do 3?
Because it's typically the audience can remember only about 3 main points.
There you go, it's part of that magic. Yeah, they can remember 3 points. You can remember 3 points. What else about 3? Julie?
I feel like maybe it's the start, the guts, and the end.
Very much can be that way, yep. And 3. What if you have 5?
I think 5 is okay, it's just that you have to be, you have to just remember that most likely they won't remember all 5, they'll remember 3.
Yep, so if you want them to remember, you might as well get the important ones up front, so it forces us to prioritize what do I really need to say. There's probably a chance in the future to say the other 2 things, but what do I need to say this time in this particular speech? And just forces that prioritization. It allows them to remember it. It allows us to remember what we're going to say, and it keeps the amount of time that we're talking to be a minimum. Because if we stick with 3, that caps us off. Again, my theme is generally, once you start talking, start thinking about how to stop. And in general, I think like a Zoom update or something, who does the meetings where it's agile and such, where it's, this is what I worked on yesterday, this is what I'm working on today, this is the problems I'm having kind of thing, okay? And do some people give good updates and some people maybe go on maybe a little bit too long? Yeah. And there would be guys that would get into it. I was writing this line of code and I had a problem with this variable and lost everybody in there. Yeah. Determine what level of detail you need to get into and keep it short. The best ones were about 25 seconds long. I did this, I'm working on this. I need help with this. Cool, clear message, shows that you're in control and you know what's going on and you're conscious of people's time.
Good question, Craig.
Yes?
What role does improv play in this? Because it's good to have a prepared speech, but what if, you know, you're in an environment like a networking event and you just get asked questions? Should you, based on what you're saying, it sounds like you should have those prepped.
Yes and no. I would go there, and I'm gonna call on my Toastmaster friends in here because we work on whether it's improv or impromptu speaking, extemporaneous speaking, speaking without notes, speaking without preparation on that. I always let's take a job interview, one of those things where we're asked questions. I always like to go into a job interview or any kind of interview with 3 to 4 stories from my experience. That can go either way. Good experiences, bad experiences, lessons learned, just 3 memorable type of events in my experience that I can then, when I get a question that comes at me from left field, how do I adapt that to one of these questions? Rather than, where do I find that instance back in my history? Now I'm just picking out something that I've already thought about in my mind and talked about a little bit, and I can adapt that in there so I can explain, tell the story shortly, and relate it back to that. So in some cases, there's a little bit of prep, sort of like carrying your stories around in your back pocket and knowing how to tell a good story, as Jocelyn said. And you can relate a story in many ways and make it to many topics as we can do that. Now, improv and impromptu, we work on that during our Toastmasters Club because things like job interviews, things like networking meetings, whatever, you're asked a question, how do you respond? Typically, and in Toastmasters, we get a question, we have to talk for 1 to 2 minutes on that. Molly's been experienced that, as do Marty and Julie on our meetings there. One of the best things to do is just not talk until you have something to say. Think about, what am I going to say? And they'll tolerate several seconds worth of silence. It can be uncomfortable for you, but if you're clearly thinking about this and you give a good response, the silence is forgiven when you get there. But think about, what am I going to say? And right away too, if you practice it enough, then it's, how do I structure this in a way that I can tell it clearly and coherently? And that has to be practiced. That has to be practiced. Or you might have it, some people have the innate skill. I do not. I cannot just simply, or I'm going to start rambling. But you have to think about, what do I need to say, and think ahead, take that moment of silence. Anything from my Toastmaster friends? Marty?
I think what you said about having a few safe bets kind of in the back pocket is probably where I work. Job interviews in particular, I can think of like the 3 stories that I told, and probably 10 job interviews over 15 years, same exact stories over and over again. And so when going to a networking event, thinking about what you may want to talk about, thinking about successful conversations you've had, versus the entire universe of everything you know, quickly narrows it down. And is that you probably are not going to talk to the same person twice in the night, you're not going to have the same person in the earshot, so go ahead and repeat that story 3 times through the night and update it as you go.
Just don't give the same story for all 3, all the questions that you get, unless you can, but it just looks like, oh, you've only had 1 experience in your whole career.
So you need a few of them in your
Yeah.
Have a couple. You asked the question, but I'm actually gonna give you the opportunity to tell your story about your exam,
Sure.
if you don't mind. Because we were talking about public speaking in advance, and Amanda gave me this story. I thought it was an excellent topic on this. Go ahead.
So I never had very much public speaking experience until I went into college. And then when I went to graduate school here at Mayo, and as part of our entrance exam into our PhD studies, we had to do, I think it was 3-hour oral exam. And it was terrifying. And I did very, very poorly. I actually failed it the first time because whenever I was asked a question, I would ramble for probably 5 minutes. And afterwards I was told they were just looking for a 2 to 3 sentence response.
How many have been in the experience of starting to talk and then realizing at some point, I'm really not saying anything anymore? best thing you do is just stop right at that moment. We had a guy last week, our friend Paul, and it was just classic, because he was given an impromptu table topic, and he started talking, and he was delivering, and then he just kind of went, and I guess that's all I have to say. It was not the strongest closing, but it was just, it kind of prompted me to say, when you run out of things to say, stop saying things.
What do you think about saying, I don't know, can we talk after this?
Perfect. Okay, and that's another topic of where we're just gonna go, because one of the things is my rules for speaking in meetings. The next couple little points here. My rules for speaking in meetings when I'm about to open my mouth. Now, I'll do a confession right first. Most of my biggest regrets in my career and my life have been because I spoke. I should have kept my mouth shut. Now, not all of those were public speaking events, but in many cases it was just because I talked too much. So having said that, I've tried to come up with these kind of 3 rules to live by when I'm sitting in the meeting and I need to do my update, or there's a discussion happening and I feel this burning need to say something. It's just, I gotta open my mouth. I have to ask myself, does it need to be said? First thing, is it that important that I'm gonna put myself out there and say something? Does it need to be said? And then, does it need to be said now? And I think that's where Dave's coming from. Because in a lot of cases I can say, okay, what I need to say really needs to go to Katie and Jocelyn, but the rest of these folks really don't, it doesn't pertain. So in that case, I'm gonna get together with Katie and Jocelyn afterwards to take it offline. I might even just say that if they ask questions, let's take that offline because it's not for the whole group, or it's not of interest to the whole group. Perfectly fine to say, let's take this offline and talk about that. And that you're not wasting everybody else's time while you're doing that sort of thing. What are the other cases there where does it need to be said now? Can you think of examples of that?
Perhaps if you're in a heated discussion, it maybe needs to wait until the situation is less heated, to be said in a better way.
Yeah, to be said in a better way, or to be taken seriously, or to be even considered or heard. Yeah.
If the meeting is going too long, just, the meeting needs to happen again, there needs to be a further discussion, save it for them.
Yep, yep.
Don't leave people in a bad mood about your commentary because you further delayed them from lunch or whatever.
Correct. You're not making points with your coworkers. Sort of back to Dave's point of nobody ever complains that a seminar was too easy or along those lines. Nobody ever complains when a meeting goes short.
I think time sensitive, I mean, I think 2 a.m. you see, watch council meetings, we go from 3 p.m. to, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. sometimes. But if it's time sensitive, like if it's, the tax levy is we need to have the vote, we have to do that. But a lot of things, you have to just sit back and is it kind? Because a lot of times, like the criticism and stuff can be weighted and private, and a lot of people want to bring up stuff too that doesn't necessarily need to be said in a meeting. It can be said, what is the saying? It's praise in public and criticize in private kind of thing. And I hear a lot of meetings where people just are, they could learn from that.
Yep,
yeah.
exactly. Classic manager approach too on that one. And the other thing is too, when we talk about the people that might go into too much detail on a Zoom update or something, on a project update, that might be a place where say, okay, John, let's take that offline and get into more details and talk about your code issues later, because there's people over here that have never written a line of code and they're not interested at all, and you're just spending their time. Again, as to Marty's point, you're taking up their lunch hour because you're just telling too much detail on that one. One thing to consider is this your only chance to have that said? Is this the only time that it can be said? Is it so on topic and so pertinent that we have to do this now? And then it would be now, it needs to be said now. So does it need to be said? Does it need to be said now? And the third one is, do I need to say it? Again, I might feel the burning need to say something there, but why would there be cases where it would be good to have somebody else say it other than you?
if you're like a subordinate has a great idea and then you one up them by doing it first or whatever, or you know, out expert everyone.
Yep, that's, if the goal is to have an idea accepted or something done.
Yeah, let it come.
Let it come from the most credible source or the most, you share the credit or give the credit, whatever else. The more important thing is to have it done as opposed to me saying it. So if you get somebody else to bring up that idea or that concept or the suggestion, by all means. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, that person just owned that idea. Now they're gonna go implement it for you. You don't have to do anything.
Exactly.
They just did his job for you.
Yep. And especially if that person is the credible one or the perceived leader within the group. Good, everybody bought into that right away. Are they gonna buy it into as easily if I say it or if that person says it? So if you can get that other person to say it. So how do you get that other person to say it? Let's not think of manipulation here. Let's just think of how do you honestly just get somebody else to say what you want to say?
Ask leading questions.
Ask leading questions. Talk them right into it. Instill their idea when they get there. Somebody described it to me once where when you're doing a jigsaw puzzle with a toddler, you don't just pile all the pieces in a pile. You kind of have everything in the right shape of the puzzle, and then they just kind of, oh, that one goes there. You know, good. You know, sort of like those leading questions. How do you let it be their idea? And as a leader, as a supervisor, it's great if they come from a different level, and they'll buy into that model.
One thing I try not to do is talk. I try to be more of a listener. But I feel one of the huge things about a leader is to be not just a good communicator, but a skilled facilitator. And I know when I was working in the school district and I worked for volunteers at Mayo Hospice and different things, where you know, to be able to have everyone have a chance to speak, because a quiet people, maybe even looking at gender and cultural differences, and just empower people to speak up. And then really for time management, it's so hard to cut people off, but having the ability to not be dismissive and like, okay, you've talked 10 times and you're talking for an hour, you're like, be able to say, well, thank you, with true gratitude and redirect. And I think that's one of the huge challenges me too, because you don't want to cut people off if they're passionate, but sometimes the loudest in the crowd monopolizes. So I find being a skilled facilitator is an incredible, important aspect to leadership.
Cool. I'm going to use that as a segue into talking about Toastmasters just for a second, because I would be remiss if I did not mention Toastmasters. Who's been in Toastmasters? Who knows of Toastmasters? Okay. Who's been in a club? Okay, sounds good. So we know what Toastmasters is. This isn't an advertisement. This thing was not designed as a promotion tool for Toastmasters. But again, what we do there is practice. We practice, and Molly said facilitating. We practice speaking, we practice facilitating a meeting. We practice timing, we practice delivery, all these things. And it's in a very small group, very friendly group. I've never been to a Toastmasters group that made me feel unwelcome. Because we're all there because we want to get better at public speaking, at our facilitation. Toastmasters is not branded as a public speaking organization, it's branded as a leadership organization. Again, because of that exercise of the perception of the two skills being so related. So we practice, we have different roles. We might give a speech, but we also have somebody called a Toastmaster that is nothing more than a facilitator. They run the meeting, and they make sure at our chamber Toastmasters meetings at 7 o'clock on Thursday mornings at Charlie's Cafe, or on Zoom, we start at 7 o'clock and we end at 8 o'clock. And it's the job of the Toastmaster to make sure that we start and end precisely at that time. So in some cases, as Molly mentioned, you have to redirect. Julie says, no, you don't. We don't do that at Fourth and Toast always. At chamber, we do. Everybody has to be at work at a certain point, so we make sure that. But we have a timer that keeps track and gives us feedback as we're giving a speech to say you're talking too long, and we cut ourselves off. We know that we're all aiming at that end point, which again is part of running a meeting, to make sure people know what's our stop point, and let's get done at this point, manage what you're gonna say so that we get done at 8 o'clock. And people will tailor their evaluations and their speeches to, if we're getting close to short on time, we'll shorten them up so that we end on time. Everybody has that same goal. So but we practice facilitation, we practice delivery, everybody gets evaluated and the whole meeting gets evaluated in a supportive way. Again, we're going to, as people come in and they haven't spoken, don't have a lot of experience in public speaking, they're going to be coached along at their appropriate level. People that have been there for 20 years are gonna get some more detailed feedback. But it's all about practice so that we're comfortable with that. Now, having said that, we have people I've been in the club now in a club since 2012. I still get nervous when I stand up to talk to the group. We have people that have been there longer than me that will say, when I stand behind that podium, my legs are just shaking like crazy. And but if you're behind a podium, nobody notices it. Which takes us to one of the last topics, which is body language and the presence. And a lot of it is the nonverbal communication. And yes, if you're standing there shaking like that, people are gonna, first of all, recognize it. Second of all, feel sorry for you because they don't want to be in that same position. But they're probably not going to be real critical of you because of those first two things. So everybody's gonna be nervous. The more you practice, the less obvious it will be. All of that is said to encourage you to think about something like Toastmasters, even if you don't speak on a regular basis in a formal setting. As we mentioned up front, even conversations are little meetings. I find that when I talk to people now, talk to my friends, I'm doing more listening and more asking of questions. And when I actually contribute to the conversation, I'm contributing less words. I try to tell my stories and jokes as quickly as I can and as clearly as I can if I'm going to say anything. But I want to get that other person to talk. And if you ask people questions and get them to talk about themselves, you will be perceived as a great conversationalist, even though you might not say anything at all. Again, kind of this theme of say more with less. I don't think you have to say nothing, but think about what we're saying as we do this. But that is I would encourage you to think about a Toastmasters club. If nothing else, it's a fun place to be. Chamber Toastmasters is a ball. I would miss that. We laugh so much there. We have so much humor involved with that club. And at Fourth and Toast, how more convenient is it than this? Wednesday morning, 8 o'clock for 30 minutes, right back here in the little conference room, free, informal, short, supportive. What else am I missing out of it? Give me some more words, Julie, Marty.
Constructive.
Constructive.
After like a year of going to that, I actually, the CEO stopped me in the hallway to say, your speaking has gotten significantly better, what are you doing?
Yes.
Marty has told me that
Yes.
before.
Yes.
Please.
We like to see people improve. We like to see people participate. And giving feedback is always constructive.
Do you just show up to those?
We just show up.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no membership, there's no fee, we had, again, 8 o'clock up here. If you walked in at 8 o'clock next week, myself or Thomas, one of us would be here, probably Thomas sitting out front, but we're right back in the back room. In fact, before you leave, just walk back there and see where we go, because it's open.
Your stuff is still back there, by the way.
Okay, my computer and everything is back there. Thank you, so I don't walk out without my computer, that would be great. But yeah, you just walk in and you would be welcomed. We had a guy join us from Saudi Arabia this morning on our Zoom. It was great. It was late afternoon for him, and he just knew that we had the link, or he had the link, so he just joined up. And we were glad to see him, and I assume that he was encouraged to participate in the meeting.
He did it on tape talk.
Excellent, sounds great. And again, expectations are such in any of those clubs where when you join, you set your own level and your own expectations when you come in. If you're brand new, people will say, come on in, and we'll start you out at the brand new level. We don't care. And we had, for years, one of our members at Chamber was a Baptist minister that preached every Sunday. And he went to Toastmasters every week to practice and get better. thought that was a great message, because it's, again, it's just not just the giving a speech, it's the facilitation. It's, he actually got to the point where his goal, he said, for the next several speeches, my goal is to work on humor. I want to put humor into my sermons. So we tolerated some attempts at humor. Which was a whole other, we didn't even cover some of when is it appropriate to put humor in. If you can put humor in, great. But judge the environment, is now the right time to say it, kind of thing, as we go there. Okay, we're running out of time here as we go. Just on the last little bit on body language there, again, as the more you practice, the more comfortable you're going to be standing in front of people. The more natural your gestures are going to be and appropriate to the environment. The more eye contact and natural eye contact you're going to be able to make. A minister I had once read every sermon, just looked down and read his whole sermon like this. And it was all I could do to stay awake. But when somebody's looking at you, you might actually need to pay attention because they're going to be looking at you again, right? Teachers use that. And again, the more natural you can be. But there are places where you want to control your hand gestures. There are places where you want to let things go. And appropriate speeches and not. When I go into my first meeting with clients and they're an executive team, I'm probably going to be quite reserved. I'm thinking that these are executives, they're just to the point people, they're not kind of real small talk oriented, and they're probably efficient and professional. I'm not going to go in there and say, and I got this great idea, and this. I'm going to present it very thoughtfully, very concisely, until I get to know them a little bit better. If I sense that, okay, now Craig can come out and be a little bit more natural, and as we get more excited about things. But I'm going to adjust it according to the audience as well. All right, on the back page, there's top 10 tips. Let's run through those and then we're done. And we'll go through these, you can take that with you. So again, one of my favorite pieces of advice for beginners especially, and this goes whether you're giving a formal speech or getting ready to give your update in a meeting, or go in with your boss or your whoever, manager or an interview, whatever. Just before you speak, just think about it. You're sitting out there in the audience and you're thinking, in 30 seconds I'm going to be standing in front of this group. And I mentally picture myself up here looking at everybody, and I sit here as I'm sitting out where Katie is, and I'm looking at everybody, but I'm imagining that I'm looking at them from the front of the room. And I think about that before I get up here, because how many people have walked up to a microphone or a podium or a table, and all of a sudden you get this rush of adrenaline that just, okay, this nervousness that hits you, that gets it out of the way up in front. So right away before you even have to get up in front of people. Don't stand up and say, I'm sorry, I don't speak very well, I'm not good at public speaking. Just start talking. That's that confidence, like Dave said, put it out there right away. Don't apologize, just start speaking. Otherwise you're setting the expectation that this isn't worth listening to. Number 3, again, write that one thing down. We talked about 3, but write one thing down. What do I need to say here? If I say nothing else, or if I go off rambling for a while, what do I need to say? I used to do children's messages at our church service, and I would have one thing written down. What do I need to say here? Otherwise, there's so many times I sat down and went, I just talked for 5 minutes and never said the one thing that I wanted to. Can't do that. Number 4, getting back to Amanda's thing about impromptu. Take those few extra seconds of silence. Just say, what am I going to say? People will give you that, that leisure to do that, and that permission to do that. But then, especially if you have something good after that. Speaking slowly and clearly. Some of us tend to talk fast. And it helps just to slow ourselves down. Pause that little bit. What am I going to say next? Before and it keeps us from rambling too. It gives us that chance to just interrupt ourselves, which goes into number 6. One of the things we work at in any of these clubs is to avoid those filler words, the ums and the ahs. This time of year it becomes very apparent with political candidates when you listen to them on the radio. Listen to them closely and hear the ones that are going ah. And so we work on avoiding those filler words when we speak. Those things imply that I don't know what I'm gonna say next. They imply that I'm making it up as I go along, which we are. But if we don't say those words, all that happens is we're just thinking about what we're gonna say next, and they say, oh, he's given some thought to this, he knows what's going on. But I hear these political candidates sometimes saying, you speak for a living, and every other word is ah. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I almost, if I had more time, I would play the podcast, because the person that was being interviewed was speaking very eloquently up to a point, and then he was asked a different question, and he just stumbled through painful well, in this case, right away you knew this guy doesn't know that answer, and he'd been better off to just say, I don't know that answer. Let's talk about that later, I'll look that up. It would have been better to just redirect it as opposed to and his way through it. A better way is just pause, don't say anything, think about what you're gonna say next, and we practice that, because we actually count our ums and ahs during our meetings, and we have a person dedicated to doing that in a nice way.
My favorite trick is someone asks me a question and I always say, that's a really good question, even if it's not, because it gives me a half second to think about it.
Exactly, exactly. We have these tricks that we do there. Along those lines, and I'll just add in there too, and number 6, my pet peeve is the word like. The people that, was it Valley Girl stuff, whatever, but I'm like, said this, and she said like this, and I did like this, and it's annoying. Worse than ums. I'd rather have them say Number 7, use powerful words. Instead of saying try, let's do. We're going to do this. Instead of saying try, we will do this. Instead of should, we will. Instead of I, we say we. Again, it's a leadership thing. Don't ramble. Number 8. Again, if you ramble, if you start rambling, just stop. Find a place to just shut up. That would be okay. Number 9, know what you're gonna say it, and stop. Again, say less all the way through. Before you give a speech, tell yourself, this is going to be fun. And smile, and boy, you can baffle them right through it. This has been a lot of fun. Anything, I'm out of time here now, but I'm not going anywhere real quick.
So I would say a few things before we release you all. Thank you for being here. We do have open co-working today, so please stick around and hang out at your desk, enjoy the co-working space. We are having a large event here on September 26th called the Collider Cup, where you'll get to hear graduates from our summer co-starters cohorts pitch their business idea, including Laura. So please stop back in. There's flyers at the front desk about it, September 26th at 5 p.m. And then our next event like this will be on October 12th. Jocelyn's actually gracious enough to be sharing her story of Rochester Home Infusion, how it started and how it was acquired. And we'll also have the open day of co-working October 12th, and we'll send all that information to you. But thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Craig, and stick around for co-working.
Sounds great. Sounds good.